Steam dominates the PC gaming market, as there is no other platform that shares even remotely as many players as Steam does. With the recent growth in PC gaming, many people have been throwing out Steam player counts as a way to determine whether a game is good or bad. But is that really true? Well, let's find out. Here are the most played games on Steam since 2009.
The black hole as well. Light of heaven turns it around.
It's going to be Dota trying to defend up.
He's going to look out the window.
Oh my god!
Starting off in 2009 with Valve's flagship game series, Counter-Strike. Valve has created quite a few genre-defining games in the early 2000s, and Counter-Strike was their flagship title to promote their PC gaming platform, Steam. In the year 2000, Valve bought up the rights to Counter-Strike, which was originally a mod for their game Half-Life 1. They then released it as a standalone game. The game was incredibly popular, and by 2003, as a way to promote their new online storefront, Valve decided to make the latest version of their game only accessible through Steam. In other words, without the popularity of Counter-Strike, Steam would never have become as big as it is today. So it just makes sense that during most of the platform's lifetime, Counter-Strike has always been in the top 3. As for why the game became popular in the first place, it can all be attributed to the competitive nature of the game. Counter-Strike invented the tactical competitive shooter genre, and while some other games were also popular competitively at the time, like the Halo series, they were only really available and played on console. On top of its competitive nature, Counter-Strike also didn't require high PC specs, meaning that pretty much any computer could run the game. With that, Valve had the perfect formula for a game that can be played anywhere in the world by anyone who wants to. With the original being this popular, it just makes sense that the sequel, Counter-Strike Source, was even more popular, especially considering that all that the sequel did was improve on its predecessor, without changing or removing any of the features that made it popular in the first place. Counter-Strike stayed on top for a really long time, but in March 2011 this would change because another Valve title would take its spot. With Portal 2, we observe something that we'll see often on this list. That is that single-player games with a campaign usually don't last more than a month on their top position. I mean, it just makes sense. Once you're finished with a single-player game, you're not exactly gonna pick it up and play it again. After Portal 2's 1 month of success, Counter-Strike was back on top. But it's interesting to note that both of the games that were leading this list are games that were created by Valve. And just like that, 3 months after the fall of Portal 2, another Valve game would take the top spot. This game was Team Fortress 2.
Yeah, good hold from Red Team. Oh my god, the soldier! Oh no!
Team Fortress 2 was the very first game that was originally paid, but then turned to a free-to-play model. And the exact date that it went free-to-play in was June 2011. This move from Valve completely revitalized the game. It also became the first game to reach over 100,000 concurrent players on Steam. Even outside the free-to-play thing, Team Fortress 2 was revolutionary for being the first hero shooter ever made. It was also the first game that was using the Steam community market, which nowadays is probably most famous for Counter-Strike skins. Talking about games that launched entire features on Steam, the next game to overtake Team Fortress 2 did exactly that. In October 2011, Skyrim broke Steam player records.
Skyrim is here to save me. Oh my god. Thank you, Skyrim. I love you, man. It's raining trophies.
Oh yes, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. One of the best games ever made, and also a game that has been re-released on every single console and platform ever since its first release in 2011. Bethesda really is milking that cow. As for the Steam feature that Skyrim brought about, it's none other than the workshop. Well, kind of. It's actually a little complicated. You see, originally the Steam Workshop was designed to distribute new items to users in Team Fortress 2. Back then it was really just a tool for in-game items rather than full-on modifications. But after the huge success of Skyrim and its budding modding scene, Steam saw an opportunity. They turned the workshop into something that any software could use if the developer decided to. A platform for full-on game modifications like new maps, items, characters, or even just full game overhauls. And the first game outside of Team Fortress 2 to ever be featured in the Steam Workshop was Skyrim. While it's not completely confirmed that the success of Skyrim and its modding scene are directly responsible for the Steam Workshop, it is most likely the case. Because without Skyrim's success, the Workshop would have probably remained an item-only focused kind of experience. The addition of the Workshop and the endless replayability that mods create made it so that Skyrim would remain in the top 15 for another 5 years. This is especially impressive considering that it is a single-player campaign-focused game. While it did stay in the top 15 for a pretty long time, it didn't last on the number 1 spot for that long, because just a couple months after its initial release, Team Fortress 2 and Counter-Strike would take that position back, but they wouldn't keep it for too long because a different game was slowly climbing up the ladder. This is another Valve title that also originated as a mod of a different game, Dota 2. Defense of the Ancients was originally a Warcraft 3 mod, or to be more precise, it was the most popular Warcraft 3 mod ever made. So popular in fact, to the point that people would buy the game specifically to play the mod. After Valve's huge success with Counter-Strike, they knew what to do. They hired the developer of the mod into their team and announced a sequel called Dota 2. While nowadays MOBAs are really common everywhere online, back then Dota was the first and only MOBA ever made, and the sequel Dota 2 was supposed to be bigger and better than ever. And not only that, it was also completely free to play, with no pay-to-win mechanics, where the only paid things you can get were cosmetic items. This too is pretty common nowadays, but back then it was truly revolutionary. The player base was already huge before the game was even announced, but the added visibility on Steam and the fact that it became completely free to play was what really gave it the final kick it needed to reach the top of this list. And once the game was live, Valve did the same thing they did for Counter-Strike. They strongly supported the competitive scene. Valve knows that a competitive game is what really keeps players engaged, and so by hosting huge tournaments with ginormous prize pools at the time, Dota 2 became a true juggernaut on the esports market. After reaching the top 3 for the first time, Dota would never leave it again. To this day, Dota will always be in the top 3 most played games on Steam, except for the occasional month with a single player game pushing it down to number 4. Now if that's not impressive, I don't know what is. Dota was the first game to reach over 200,000 concurrent players and over 300,000 concurrent players as well. And if you just keep looking at the top of this list, you'll see it breaks so many more records as well. But we can't just keep talking about Dota 2 only. Let's talk about some of the other games that made this list but couldn't quite reach the top.
There is no shame in deterrence. Having a weapon is very different from actually using it.
Something that might surprise quite a lot of you is that grand strategy games like Civilization and Total War, and even sometimes the Mount & Blade series, will almost always be in the top 15. These are all games that I like to consider dad games. While they are very popular with younger players, and even I play some of those myself, they are also incredibly popular with the older generations. Most households since the early 2000s have an office somewhere in their home. This office is usually just used by parents for filing taxes and sending emails and faxes, but they were also often used to play games like Solitaire, Minesweepers, and others. And ever since Steam became more popular and accessible, it became easier for these people to also try out different kinds of games. Because of the slower, more relaxed nature of these grand strategy games, they immediately became popular with that generation. Nowadays, millions of people over 40 play games like Civilization, Total War, and the Mount & Blade series. And especially in more recent years, the amount of younger players that just pick up these games to have something more relaxing to play on the side has been growing significantly. In October 2013, a different, very interesting game became the second most played game on Steam. This is the first indie title to ever get that far, Terraria.
Bye.
And that's only the first boss in the easiest section of the game.
Terraria went on a generational run. The game released in May 2011, and a whole 2.5 years later, it found itself as the game with the second highest concurrent player count on Steam, beating out even Team Fortress 2 and Counter-Strike. But what's truly remarkable about Terraria is that to this day, it is the 11th best-selling game of all time. The only other indie title in the top 10 is a game that started as an indie game, but now has been acquired by Microsoft, Minecraft. So Terraria truly did something that no one else could. The reason for the spike in players in October 2013 was the release of Terraria version 1.2, an update that added new biomes, enemies, and items to the game for free. Unfortunately for Terraria though, this spike would not last for too long. This is mostly due to how the game was designed, as the main goal of the game is to just beat every boss, and once you've done that, there aren't really many reasons to pick the game back up again. Fortunately for Terraria though, this was not the last time it would have such a huge spike in players. But before we talk about that next spike, did you know that Grand Theft Auto 5 released a whole 12 years ago, and then in 2015 also released on Steam? I feel so damn old right now.
Davey!
GTA 5 originally only released on consoles in 2013, but 2 years later when it released on Steam, the player counts exploded. In just the first day of being on Steam, the game reached over 300,000 concurrent players. At its peak, GTA 5 had over 360,000 concurrent players. Sure, that wasn't really enough to beat Counter-Strike or Dota, but it beat everything else on the platform. This was especially impressive considering that GTA is a full-priced game. And it wasn't even the first release, it was originally released a whole 2 years prior to the Steam release. These kinds of numbers make me really curious to know what it's gonna be like when GTA 6 releases. Another thing that's incredibly impressive about GTA 5 is that once it landed on this list, it never left. Up to this day, GTA 5 is still in the top 15 most played games on Steam. While the single-player campaign was already incredibly well made and interesting to play through, what really kept players at the game was GTA Online. Rockstar never really stopped adding new content to GTA Online, and it's basically just one big online sandbox for you and your friends to cause mayhem in. GTA really has something for everyone. If you want to just play a driving game and race through crazy tracks, you can play on custom tracks by other players. If you want to rob a bank with your friends and just mess around and kill NPCs, that's an option too. And if you want to pretend to be a real police officer or a real criminal, there's lots of RP servers for you. And the final thing that was responsible for GTA 5's growing user base was YouTube video creators. GTA on YouTube is a whole subgenre of creators, and if you want to find more of them, you should head over to Favory and look up GTA 5. Links in the description below. After GTA's Steam release, a lot of other really good games released as well and landed pretty high on this list, but the one game that's really remarkable in that aspect is Garrys Mod, a game that has been on this list since the very beginning and never really left. If you're a younger viewer, you probably know about Roblox, and if you're an older viewer, you probably already know about Garrys Mod, which is actually kind of funny because Garrys Mod released a whole 2 months after Roblox. Both games essentially follow the same exact concept. They're big sandboxes for players to create other games in them. But they're not limited to just games, you can also make animations and other things through these sandboxes. For example, did you know that Skibidi Toilet is a Garrys Mod animation? Gmod animations by themselves are also a whole subcategory on YouTube. Just like Counter-Strike was originally a mod of Half-Life 1, Garrys Mod was originally a mod of Half-Life 2, and then later on became its own standalone experience. When Gary Newman first created the game, he just wanted to have a sandbox where people could play around with the physics-based objects and engine of Half-Life 2. It very quickly evolved past that though. The community took over and started making other games like Trouble in Terrorist Town and Prop Hunt inside of Garrys Mod. And as if that wasn't enough, Garrys Mod is also the mecca of role-playing. Some of the games that were made inside of Garrys Mod became so popular, they had knockoff versions as standalone games releasing on Steam as well. Especially Prop Hunt became so incredibly popular that it's now also a part of the Call of Duty games. And the best part is that these games were made by the community completely for free. No one actually made any money off of them initially. Bringing back the Roblox comparison from the beginning, unlike Roblox, Garrys Mod has never been free. And additionally, due to it using Half-Life 2 assets, it's also not very child-friendly. If it wasn't for those two factors, it would probably join Dota 2 and Counter-Strike at the top of this list. Talking about games which started from mods, how about we talk about the Battle Royale craze? After the release of the Hunger Games movie in 2012, people wanted to see this kind of format inside of a video game. You first started seeing it as mods for Arma 2 and Minecraft. In Minecraft, this one was also called Hunger Games and then later renamed to survival games due to legal issues. The Arma 2 story, on the other hand, directly led to the development of some of the best known battle royales today, but the whole story is a little bit more complicated. First, in 2012, a zombies mod for Arma 2 called DayZ was released. This mod focused on both survival and player-to-player encounters. Unlike battle royale games though, it didn't have a last man standing rule. Instead, when you died, you would drop all of your items and then you could respawn. The game was heavily focused on survival and zombie encounters, with the PvP elements being a little less in the focus. After the release of the Hunger Games movie later that same year, a different person started working on a mod for the mod. This was none other than Brandon Green, also better known as Player Unknown. He modded the game to directly include different aspects from the Hunger Games movie, like the shrinking playzone and the scattered items all around the map. This forced players into more encounters with other players, and the last one standing was the winner. This mod was incredibly popular, and not too much later, Player Unknown started working with the developers of H1Z1 as a consultant for their standalone Battle Royale game. Not much later, he started working on his own game as well. You probably already know which game I'm talking about. It's none other than Player Unknown's Battleground, or PUBG for short. The funniest part of this is that both H1Z1's Battle Royale game and PUBG released on the same year. With the ginormous amount of YouTubers playing PUBG with their friends, it quickly became a trend, and like with every other trend, you quickly started seeing other games doing the exact same thing. This is also how Fortnite turned into a battle royale game. But Fortnite is not on Steam, so it's not on this list. At its peak, PUBG had over 3.2 million concurrent players. That is higher than any other game has ever had on Steam before that. It even beat out both Dota and Counter-Strike combined. Calling PUBG huge doesn't even begin to describe it. It was by far the biggest game of its time. It is so impressive that to this day, no other game on Steam has ever reached more than 3 million concurrent players, with the second place spot sitting at a measly 2.4 million concurrent players. As for what that game is, we'll get to that later. Unfortunately for PUBG, the hype didn't last forever, and a year and a half later, it fell down from its top spot. The Battle Royale craze is also the time that Steam started getting its first serious competitor, Epic Games. Let's talk about Steam, how it changed over the years, and how the PC gaming landscape changed with it. Steam has gone through many changes during its lifetime. While it originally was mainly just a game launcher for Half-Life and Counter-Strike, it quickly became a storefront for online game purchases, and then it very quickly also gained a monopoly on just that. Steam is huge, and it has always been the biggest PC game storefront ever. And while some others tried to compete, no one even got close to the numbers Steam was making. What's especially interesting with this is that the reason why Steam is so popular is not just because it's the only option, but rather because Steam actually puts the consumer first. Steam has massive sales going on every single day where you can get AAA titles for as little as $3 or even less at times. The cut they take from every sale on the platform is pretty reasonable, as it currently sits at 20%, and their algorithm to help players find new games is actually great, which helps developers in the long run because it puts their games out there. And I haven't even touched on the customization, market, and workshop parts of the platform. Nowadays, if you think about software monopolies, you think of companies like Adobe, companies that very clearly use exploitative price tactics and basically try to squeeze as much money from their customers as possible, just because there is no other viable alternative on the market. Steam, on the other hand, is so good for consumers that any serious competitor has to offer free stuff for anyone who wants to use it. Now, this sounds kind of crazy and like something nobody would ever do, but then Epic Games came, and they did just that, and every week they offer free games to anyone who's installed their launcher. While some other companies also try to compete with Steam, like Ubisoft with their own game store and EA with theirs, the only one who actually kind of stands a chance and is somewhat seen as an actual threat to Steam is Epic Games. Still, even though they give out free games to anyone who has their launcher, they're still incredibly small compared to Steam, as it only has about 1/5 of the monthly active users that Steam does. Alright, I've been glazing Steam for long enough, and I sure hope that in 5 to 10 years this didn't age like milk. Until then, let's talk a little bit more about Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike has always been one of Valve's flagship games, and even though it started as a free mod for Half-Life 1, once it got its first release as a standalone game, it started costing money. It was never a lot of money, but it was also never free, with the newest versions of the game, ever since the release of the original Counter-Strike as a standalone game, always costing $20 each. But on December 6, 2018, this changed because Counter-Strike went free to play. This was a huge move for Valve because it was literally the best-selling game on their entire platform. But by that time, because Counter-Strike gambling became so big, Steam was making a lot more money from market sales than they were from the actual game sales themselves. Yeah, unfortunately, it's impossible to talk about modern Counter-Strike without mentioning the whole gambling aspect it has today. CoffeeZilla made an entire video series about the shady happenings behind Counter-Strike gambling and its industry. I can't really go into more detail without doubling the length of this video, but the TLDR is basically that you can buy and sell skins in Counter-Strike for real money. These can then be used by kids to gamble in actual casinos. Basically, it's a slot machine for kids, but with real money involved. We've linked the CoffeeZilla video in our description as well, so if this is something you're interested in, go check it out. With the game now being free and Counter-Strike casinos doing huge sponsorships with big content creators in order to get their name out there, the player base just continued to grow. About a year after going free to play, by October 2019, Counter-Strike became the most played game on Steam, overtaking Dota 2 for the first time in many years. As the pandemic hit in 2020 and people were starving for social interactions, a different type of game started to rise on this leaderboard. It was the rise of the MMORPGs.
My eyes hurt? Yeah. Microtransaction time? Yeah.
The pandemic truly was a golden era for online game that requires socializing with other players. This also includes games like Among Us or survival co-op games like Valheim and other such titles. But the games that truly shone on Steam were none other than MMORPGs, or massively multiplayer role-playing games. A lot of the most popular MMOs are not on Steam. This includes World of Warcraft, World of Warcraft Classic, Guild Wars 2, RuneScape, etc. But these are mostly just older games. When it comes to newer MMOs, most of them do launch on Steam initially, and that was the case for New World Aeternum in October 2021. For a very short period of time, in October 2021, New World Aeternum became the most played game on Steam. But it didn't last very long, because people quickly realized how bad the game actually was. MMOs are definitely not a genre for everyone, and New World Aeternum was not exactly an exceptional one of those. Then, just a few months later, in February 2022, Lost Ark released. Lost Ark is a game that is very strongly inspired by Path of Exile, a game that's already been extremely popular on Steam for a really long time. It seemed to be going extremely well for them at first, because they managed to beat out Counter-Strike in March 2022 and reach over 1.3 million concurrent players on Steam. Sure, it's no PUBG, but it's still massively impressive. Unfortunately for them though, the game was not exactly what it was hyped up to be. Most of the interesting content was in the beginning portion of the game. Because of this, as soon as players started getting into later areas, they quickly got bored and called the game a chore rather than a fun time. By April, the game was back down to number 3 on this list, and while it did grow again and almost took the top spot again in June, by July 2022, the player counts were less than 1/3 of its peak numbers. Not too late after this, the quarantines were somewhat lifted in certain places, and it became easier to socialize in real life again. This also marked the time where MMORPGs started slowly getting smaller again. Ever since then, we haven't really had a real trend in the top games on this list, but rather a lot of smaller, interesting titles popping up left and right. In January 2024, the unthinkable happened. An indie game became the most played game on Steam. While nowadays they're facing lawsuits from Nintendo, Palworld did something that no other game could. Palworld originally started as a small project from a team of 10 people. As the hype grew bigger, every time trailers were shown, the team slowly expanded to a little over 50 people. Their total budget, less than $7 million. While this might sound high, for video games that's actually not that much. For example, GTA 6 will cost a little over $1 billion to make, but even smaller titles like the Pokemon games usually have a budget between $20 and $50 million. And the craziest part, the studio behind the game was almost completely unknown. And yet still, they somehow managed to be the most played game on Steam. And not just that, they were also the second game to ever break 2 million concurrent players. They didn't just beat Counter-Strike, they beat every single game on the platform except for PlayerUnknown's Battleground. But well, considering that it is a bit of a linear game, it makes sense that the hype wouldn't last for too long, and after just 3 months it would completely vanish off the list. Funnily enough, in August that same year, a different game released that would break Palworld's record. A game that truly everyone was hyped for, Black Myth Wukong. In the past, games like Black Myth Wukong would have done incredibly well on console and not so well on PC. The computer and console player bases were generally very divided, especially in what games they played. But in recent years, with console prices going up exponentially and PC prices staying about the same, it started getting increasingly more logical for people to just get a powerful computer instead of a console. The convenience of Steam and the incredibly low prices are also a big factor as to why people switch to PC. Yeah, the price of a PS5 is most definitely cheaper than a high-end computer. But if the games cost you more than double the price and you have a lot less choice, it just makes sense to get a computer. Just like previous single-player linear games, Black Myth Wukong wouldn't stay on top for very long. But while it was on top, it had the second highest concurrent player count ever recorded on Steam. Today, PC gaming is bigger than it has ever been, and Steam therefore is also bigger than ever before. There are only a few other launchers that can even compete with Steam, one of them being the Epic Games Store, and others being ultra-specific platforms that are only used for one publisher's games. For example, the Riot Games launcher and the EA app. With the recent announcement that Steam may be coming to the next generation of Xbox consoles as well, it really seems like it will continue its streak of dominance. And honestly, while it's usually something I don't support, with Steam, I'm kind of okay with it, to be honest. They've been doing a pretty good job. Sure, they do have some issues, especially when it comes to things like kids gambling, but other than that, there isn't really much bad you can say about Steam. And to go back full circle to the beginning of this video, after seeing this chart, do you believe that Steam player counts are a good way to assess the quality of a game? Personally, I don't really think so, but let me know in the comments what your opinion on this is, and which game do you think will be the next one to hold the title of the most concurrent players on Steam? I'll make sure to read through every comment and reply to as many as I can. Have a great one and see you next time. Make sure to subscribe and click that notification bell so you won't miss any of our future videos.